Let's speak about the most important thrash metal albums, and of course I'm speaking about myself and my point of view and my taste. So for me, if we are starting first of all from the old school thrash American scene, for me the best thrash album of all the ages is of course the first album of Exodus, Bonded by Blood. I think that this is the most important thrash metal album of all the ages. And afterwards we are coming now to the Big Four, the famous Big Four. And for me, the most important band inside the Big Four is of course Slayer. And if we're speaking about Slayer, maybe for me, I prefer so much the first album, So No Mercy, that it's not so thrash. But if we're speaking only about thrash, of course, everyone, I think that he will agree that The Rainy Blood is the best album of Slayer and of thrash metal inside the Big Four. Afterwards, we were speaking about Metallica. Metallica, and always inside the metalheads and inside the thrash world is the conflict. Who is better, Metallica or Megadeth? People, they are like to conflict about this subject. I think that the truth is something in the middle. I prefer a little bit more Metallica, but for me, the best album of Metallica and even the most thrash metal of them is of course the debut album, their first album, Kill 'Em All. People there think also that this is the first thrash album generally, but maybe Exciter from Canada with the Heavy Metal Maniac, that it was a little bit less thrash, more speed thrash, is the first thrash album. Okay. And now if we're speaking about Megadeth, many people will say that their best album of thrash metal is Rust in Peace. And I understand that, but for me, I prefer Peace Sells, but Who's Buying? And now we are coming to Anthrax. I know that many people, and inside them also I have the same opinion. Maybe Anthrax, they have a very special sound and they influenced the scene in general, but maybe they will not have to be inside the Big Four. But in any case, for me, their best album of Anthrax is of course Among the Living. And now, if we continue with the American scene of old school thrash metal, let's speak about Nuclear Assault. Okay, Nuclear Assault is something between crossover in these years and thrash metal, and their album Game Over is very, very special. I'm continuing with Heathen and their first album. This first album has also a little bit speed sound inside, Breaking the Silence. And now Violence with their album Eternal Nightmare. Some people also know that inside Violence afterwards started another band, Machine Head. But this album is so important to thrash. And then if we're speaking about Testament, in their beginning many people they confused and they thought that they are very influenced by Metallica. They called them something like Testalica in these years. But their second album, their first name was The Legacy, afterwards they became Testament. Their second album, The New Order, for me, is the best of them. Forbidden, another thrash metal band from United States, and Forbidden Evil is their best album for me. Sacred Reich, and for me their best album is the first one, Ignorance. I'm not saying that I not prefer also the American Way or South Nicaragua, the EP, but Sacred Reich, I prefer so much Ignorance, their first album. And now Whiplash. Whiplash with the album Power and Pain. I know their cover of the album is so childish, but it's a very good album. At last, from the old school American scene, let's speak about Overkill. Yes, Overkill. Maybe one of these bands of thrash metal that they continue all the way inside the 90s, in the years that thrash metal was dead for many people. They, from United States, Overkill, and also Tankard from Germany, and let's say also Annihilator from Canada, they were these bands that they continue album by album to be faithful to thrash metal. They made, even they did make changes about their sound. All the other bands, or they changed their sound in these years and came back afterwards, or they were disbanded and dismissed. So let's speak about Overkill and their first album, Feel the Fire. And now, let's go to the German scene of thrash metal. The big three. Yeah, the big three. First of all, Sodom. For me, Sodom is the best thrash band, metal band from Germany. And I prefer Persecution Mania. Afterwards, Creator, and their second album, Pleasure to Kill. Destruction, the album Infernal Overkill. And now let's speak about Tankard. I like very much Tankard and also their first albums. Yeah, Zombie Attack, Chemical Invasion, The Morning After, Meaning of Life, etc. Alien, the EP. But I don't know why I prefer so much their last albums, and I will, for this reason, now I will speak about an album of the last period of Tankard. A Girl Called Cerveza. Also the song and also the album is killer. A cult, let's say a cult band from Germany, also so special with two albums in these years. Afterwards, in these days, they are also together and they put out another two albums. Exhumer. Exhumer with their second album, Possessed by Fire. And now an album, a thrash metal band from Germany with only one album, Violent Force, and their album Malevolent Assault of Tomorrow. So good. The last album from Germany that we'll speak is not exactly thrash, it's between speed and thrash metal, and is the band with the name Risk. Their first album, The Daily Horror News. Yeah, the cover is also very childish, like Dora the Exploradora, but the music is something very special.
In some songs, they're very, very close to Halloween in their first album, Walls of Jericho. Speed and thrash in their best way. And now let's continue and speak about the Canadian thrash metal scene. Yes, the Canadian, because people, they don't speak so much about Canada. They speak about United States, about thrash metal, or about Germany, but Canada a little bit. But Canada has so many bands of thrash metal: Voivod, Annihilator, Anvil, they were the forefathers also of thrash metal, Slaughter, Sacrifice, Infernal Majesty, Razor, of course. So, let's start. First of all, for me, Exciter, their first album, Heavy Metal Maniac. For some people, this is the first thrash metal album, even before Kill 'Em All for some months. Oh. Secondly, Annihilator. Yes, Annihilator. Maybe the most famous Canadian thrash metal band. And their first album, Alice in Hell. And now, Sacrifice. Yeah, Sacrifice. And the album Forward to Determination, that is so good. A thrasher has to listen to this album. A real thrasher. Razor. Everything from Razor is very special. But let's speak about Violent Restitution. So thrashy and so fast. And now, if we're speaking also about the English thrash metal scene, with bands like Sabbath, like Onslaught, and etc., let's speak about Onslaught and their second album, The Force. That is also so special. And now, if we're speaking about the old school thrash metal bands, let's remember also Sepultura from Brazil and their third album, Beneath the Remains. For me, this was the first thrash album that I listened, and so special. Also, their first album is Morbid Visions, and also the album Schizophrenia is very good, and The Rise afterwards. But this album, I like it so much. And now, let's speak a little bit about today, about the old school thrash metal of today. And we have bands that they continue, and not only they continue, they were there to make the comeback of thrash metal in these days. And first of all, we have to speak about Municipal Waste, of course, with their second album, Hazardous Mutation, that especially for me, this album is also crossover thrash metal. Because of this album, so many thrash metal bands, new thrash metal bands of the new wave of old school thrash metal started and became famous. But not only that, so many also old school bands they make a comeback to their sound and to their way of life. And together with Municipal Waste, we have also to remember Toxic Holocaust. Of course, here I bring an overdose of death, but each album of them is special. And together with them, let's speak about Legion of the Damned. Okay, they're a little bit more death in their sound, but thrash death. Legion of the Damned, their first album, Malevolent Rapture, and people maybe they know that before that they make the band Legion of the Damned,
they were another band from Holland of the name Occult. And some words about the Greek thrash metal scene. The Greek thrash metal scene is so good, let's say, in the way that the new wave of old school thrash metal American scene is, or German thrash metal scene. And let's speak about bands like Suicidal Angels, like Conviction, like Released Anchor. And here I will bring 3 albums. First of all, the first EP of Conviction, Metal Drinking Conspiracy. That's so good. They have also 2 albums. And of course, a band that most people today they know from Greece, Suicidal Angels. And for me, their best album is Dead Again. But I will say 2 another albums. Mentally Defiled, for example, The Thrash Brigade, so good. And at last, but not least, Speed Rush. Speed Rush with their first album, Endless War. So, from Jerusalem of Israel, stay metal and stay heavy.